My son called from his Caribbean vacation but forgot to hang up the phone. I listened as he told his wife their plan to put me in a nursing home because I was a burden. He thought he was coming home to take control of my life and my valuable house. He didn't know I would spend the next 10 days selling that house, booking a lifetime round-the-world cruise, and rewriting my will to leave him nothing, all before his plane even landed. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Ruth Bishop. For 40 years, I was the university bursar at Howard University. My life was a symphony of numbers, a world of budgets, endowments, and the quiet, immense responsibility of managing the financial heartbeat of a great institution. I am a woman who understands the unforgiving logic of a balance sheet. At 71, my life is now a quieter composition, lived out in a beautiful historic row house in Capitol Hill that I own outright, a home filled with books and the comfortable silence of a life well lived and prudently managed. This quiet, however, is punctuated once a week by the discordant notes of my son, Kevin, and his wife, Jessica. They call it their duty dinner, a weekly pilgrimage from their sprawling, heavily mortgaged mansion in Potomac, Maryland, to my humble, paid-for corner of Washington, D.C. They arrive in a cloud of expensive perfume and restless, ambitious energy, and they fill my peaceful home with their anxieties. "Mother, this room is so dark," Jessica will say, her eyes sweeping over my comfortable, book-lined living room with a look of pitying condescension. "A little recessed lighting and some lighter paint would do wonders. It would really open up the space and improve the resale value." The resale value. They speak of my home, the place where I raised my son, the place where my late husband and I shared a lifetime of memories, as if it were a stock in their portfolio, an underperforming asset. Kevin, my son, a man who has inherited his father's charm but none of his substance, will chime in, his voice a smooth, practiced performance of filial concern. "She's right, Mom. You're rattling around in this big old house all by yourself. We worry about you. The stairs, the upkeep. It's a lot for one person. I know what they are doing. I am the bursar. I have spent a lifetime listening to deans and department heads try to justify their budgets, and I know the sound of a hidden agenda. Their concern is not for my well-being. It is for the $3 million mortgage-free asset upon which I am currently and inconveniently living. They are not worried about my comfort. They are worried about their inheritance. They see me not as a mother but as a friendly but stubborn tenant in a house they already consider their own. They have no idea that the woman who spent 40 years managing multi-million-dollar university budgets is more than capable of managing her own life, and of recognizing a hostile takeover bid when she sees one. The drive from their Potomac mansion to my Capitol Hill row house is a journey of about 45 minutes, a span of time that Kevin and Jessica use to rehearse their narrative. I know this because, on occasion, their performance slips, and I am treated to a line or a phrase that has clearly been workshopped in the privacy of their luxury SUV. The central theme of this narrative is my status as a burden. Their life, as they project it, is one of effortless success. Kevin is a wealth manager, a title that sounds impressive but is, I know from my own quiet research, a commission-based job in a boutique firm where he is under constant pressure to bring in new clients. Jessica is a luxury interior designer, a profession that seems to consist mainly of having expensive lunches and managing a team of actual workers. They live in a house that is twice the size of mine and carries a mortgage that makes my bursar's heart ache. They are drowning in a sea of their own ambition, living a life they cannot afford, and they have identified my quiet, solvent life as the solution to their self-inflicted problems. I once overheard a snippet of their conversation as they were leaving a duty dinner, their voices drifting back through the open front door. "I just don't understand why she's so stubborn," Jessica had said, her voice a sharp, frustrated hiss. "That house is a goldmine. We could pay off all our debts, Robert's school tuition, everything if she would just be reasonable." "I know, honey, I know," Kevin had replied, his voice a weary, placating murmur. "She's from a different generation. They get attached to things. As if my home, my life, were a sentimental trinket I was foolishly clinging to. The burden narrative has many subplots. There is the 'she's so lonely' plot, which they deploy when they want to suggest I move into a managed care community. There is the house is too much for her plot, which they use to justify their suggestions of selling. And there is the most insidious plot of all, the her mind is starting to slip plot. This one is more subtle, deployed in small, passive-aggressive gestures. Mom, I told you about that dinner party last week, don't you remember? Kevin will say when he knows full well he did not. Mother Bishop, are you sure you turned off the stove? You've been a little forgetful lately, Jessica will chime in, her voice dripping with a false, sweet concern. They are building a case brick by painstaking brick. A case for my incompetence, my decline, my inability to manage my own life. They are laying the groundwork for a future in which they, as the loving, responsible children, will have no choice but to step in and help me by taking control of my assets. They believe they are being clever, that their long-term strategy is invisible to me. They do not understand that I have spent a lifetime overseeing the budgets of entire university departments filled with scheming, ambitious academics. I can spot a long-term strategy from a mile away. And theirs is clumsy, obvious, and deeply, deeply insulting. The next phase of their campaign was launched as so many familial assaults are, under the guise of a generous offer. It was a Sunday evening in early December. The duty dinner was particularly cloying, filled with an excess of solicitous questions about my health and my holiday plans. I knew something was coming. After dinner, as I was preparing to leave, Kevin and Jessica sat me down in the living room, their faces arranged in masks of serious, loving concern. Mom, Kevin began, taking my hand in his. His own hand was clammy, a sure sign of his discomfort with the lie he was about to tell. Jess and we've been worried about you. You'll be all alone for Christmas this year. And we can't bear the thought of it. So we had an idea, Jessica chimed in, her smile a little too bright. As you know, we're taking a much-needed holiday. We've booked 2 weeks at a resort in St. Bart's. A chance to finally, truly unplug. And, Kevin continued, getting to the point, we were wondering if you would do us a huge favor. We need someone to house sit, to look after the dog, to collect the mail. And we thought, who better than you? The offer was presented as a gift to me. A favor they were asking, but one whose primary benefit would be mine. You could have a little vacation of your own, Jessica said, her voice a purr of false generosity. Get out of the city. Enjoy the peace and quiet of the suburbs. The house is so comfortable. You'd have the run of the place. It would be a little holiday for you and a huge weight off our minds, knowing the house was in good hands. It was a brilliant, manipulative move. They were framing their own strategic objective, getting me out of my own house for an extended period, as a selfless act of kindness towards me. They needed me out of the way. They needed the house empty so they could begin the next phase of their plan, bringing in real estate agents for a private assessment, getting a head start on the paperwork, perhaps even starting to quietly declutter my life for the impending sale. I saw the lie, the strategy, the profound and insulting condescension in their offer. But I also saw an opportunity to let them believe they were winning, an opportunity to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. So I played my part. I feigned a tearful, grateful acceptance. Oh, Kevin, Jessica, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a lonely, grateful old woman. That is the kindest, most thoughtful thing anyone has ever offered me. I would be honored to look after your beautiful home. The look of relieved, triumphant satisfaction that passed between them was a thing of pure, ugly beauty. They had done it. They had successfully maneuvered the old woman out of the way. The path to their inheritance was now clear. Wonderful, Mom, Kevin said, his voice booming with a false, hearty cheer. It's settled then. We'll drop off the keys and the dog on our way to the airport. They had no idea that they were not just giving me the keys to their house. They were giving me the keys to their downfall. The PTOAC Mansion was exactly as I had imagined it. Large, cold, and profoundly soulless. It was a house designed not for living but for impressing. The furniture was all sharp angles and uncomfortable-looking fabrics. The art on the walls was abstract, expensive, and completely devoid of personality. It was a house that had been decorated, not curated. It was a house with a mortgage, and it felt like it. I spent the first few days of my house sitting in a state of quiet, anthropological observation. I was a researcher in a foreign habitat. I looked after their sad, overbred little dog. I collected their mountains of mail, which consisted mainly of bills and catalogs for things they couldn't afford. And I waited. The call came on the 5th day of my stay. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the vast white-on-white kitchen making myself a cup of tea when my cell phone rang. It was Kevin. The connection was staticky, the sound of a weak signal from a distant tropical island. "Mom?" he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful, the sound of a man who has been drinking cocktails since noon. "Just calling to check in. How's everything going? Is the house still standing?" "Everything is fine, Kevin," I said, my own voice a calm, steady thing. "The dog is fine. The mail has been collected. You have a very large bill from Neiman Marcus." He laughed, a short, sharp and slightly nervous sound. "Just put it on the pile, Mom. Just put it on the pile." We engaged in a few minutes of stilted, superficial small talk. He asked about the weather in D.C. I asked about the weather in St. Bart's. He told me a boring, self-congratulatory story about a man he had met at the resort who was a major player in the world of finance. It was the conversation of two strangers, a mother and a son who had not had a real, honest exchange in years. Then, at the end of the call, he said the words that would change everything. "All right, Mom, I've got to run," he said, his voice now distracted as if he were talking to someone else in the room. "Jessica is signaling that it's time for another margarita. You take care. Love you, bye." "You too, dear," I said. I heard a click, but it was a soft, distant sound. I was about to end the call on my own phone when I heard his voice again, no longer talking to me but to his wife, his voice now clear and conspiratorial, stripped of all its performative, filial affection. He had forgotten to hang up the phone. He had failed to properly disconnect the call. And I, his mother, was now a silent, invisible witness to the conversation he never wanted me to hear. In the sudden, profound silence of the vast white kitchen, my son's voice, coming through the small speaker of my phone, was as clear and as damning as a courtroom confession. He had moved away from his phone, but the microphone was sensitive enough to pick up his conversation with Jessica in the background of their breezy, sun-drenched resort suite. "Was that her?" I heard Jessica ask, her voice a sharp, impatient thing. "Yeah, it was her," Kevin replied, his voice a low, dismissive sigh. "The warden of Capitol Hill. Everything is fine. The dog hasn't burned the house down yet." "Good," Jessica said. "Did you talk to the advisor at the facility again? Is everything set?" My blood ran cold. "The facility?" "Yeah, I spoke to him this morning," Kevin said, his voice now a low, conspiratorial murmur. "It's all set. He said they have a private room available starting the 1st of the month. It's a nice place, Jess. Top of the line. She'll be comfortable. A private room. The 1st of the month." The words were pieces of a puzzle, a horrifying, ugly puzzle that was rapidly assembling itself in my mind. "Comfortable and, more importantly, managed," Jessica said, her voice laced with a triumphant finality. "No more of this, I'm fine on my own nonsense. We'll have the power of attorney. We can finally make the decisions that need to be made." And then my son, my only child, the little boy I had raised, the man whose life I had dedicated my own to, spoke the words that would sever the last lingering thread of my maternal love. "It's all set," he said, his voice a calm, rational and utterly chilling statement of intent. "I spoke to the advisor at the facility. I'm sending her to a nursing home when we get back. She's too much of a burden for us." The words, so brutal, so final, so utterly devoid of love or compassion, hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had to grip the edge of the marble countertop to keep my knees from buckling. A nursing home. A facility. They were not just planning to sell my house. They were planning to dispose of me. Jessica's response was a sound of pure, unadulterated and gleeful victory. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Finally. And then we can call the realtor. That agent I know, the one who specializes in historic properties. She said we could get the house on the market within a week. With a cash offer we could be closed in 30 days. And then we can finally live properly. Life properly." The phrase was a window into the soul of their greed. My life, my home, my independence. It was all just an obstacle to their desire to live properly. I stood there, frozen, in the silent white kitchen of their empty, soulless house, and I listened as they discussed the logistics of my own erasure. They talked about selling my furniture, about donating my books, about the renovations they would make to the house to maximize its sale price. They spoke of me not as a person, not as a mother, but as a problem that was about to be solved, an asset that was about to be liquidated. I do not know how long I stood there, listening to the quiet, monstrous details of their plan. It felt like an eternity. But at some point the call finally, truly disconnected. The line went dead. And I was left alone in the silence, with the echo of my son's betrayal ringing in my ears. In the wake of the disconnected call, a profound and terrifying silence descended upon the house. The only sound was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart. The initial shock was a physical thing, a wave of nausea and a dizzying, disorienting vertigo. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. The first instinct was to shatter. To fall to the floor and weep with the raw, animal pain of a mother who has just been condemned by her own child. To scream. To rage. To smash the beautiful, empty, meaningless objects that filled this hollow house. But then something else took over. A lifetime of discipline. A lifetime of quiet, methodical, and deeply ingrained competence. The 40 years I had spent as the university bursar at Howard, a woman who had managed crises, who had balanced multi-million-dollar budgets, who had faced down angry deans and entitled professors with an unshakable professional calm. That woman, the woman I had been for my entire adult life, rose up through the tidal wave of my grief and took control. The tears did not fall. The scream did not come. The pain, so immense and so absolute, was flash-frozen. It was transformed in an instant into a single hard and diamond-bright point of pure, cold, and utterly silent fury. My mind, which had been reeling with a mother's heartbreak, became a bursar's ledger. The situation was no longer a personal tragedy. It was a hostile takeover bid. And I, the chief financial officer of my own life, was about to mount a swift, overwhelming, and devastatingly effective defense. I began to analyze the data. Asset 1-1, historic, fully paid for row house in Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. Current estimated market value, $3.2 million. Liabilities 1-1, entitled, grasping, and deeply indebted son. 1-1, cruel, manipulative, and equally grasping daughter-in-law. Their strategy: to neutralize the primary shareholder, me, by having me legally declared incompetent and moved to a managed care facility. To seize control of the primary asset, the house, through power of attorney. To liquidate the asset and use the proceeds to solve their own self-inflicted financial problems. My counter-strategy: to liquidate the asset myself before they could. To remove the prize from the board. To restructure my own life and my own estate in a way that would render their entire monstrous plan not just ineffective, but completely and comically irrelevant. I walked, my movements now calm and deliberate, from the kitchen into the grand two-story home office that was Kevin's pride and joy. It was a room designed to project an image of power and success, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with books he had never read, and its massive, imposing desk. I sat down in his expensive, ergonomic leather chair. I opened his high-end, powerful laptop computer. I was a guest in this house, a burden, a charity case. But for the next 10 days, while its owners were sunning themselves in the Caribbean, this house, this office, this high-speed internet connection would be my war room. The time for being a mother was over. The time for being a bursar had begun. And the first order of business was to call my own personal and very, very loyal legal counsel. My first and only call was to Dolores Jackson. D. My best friend of 50 years, my college roommate, my maid of honor, the godmother to the very son who had just so casually condemned me to a living death. D was also, conveniently, a retired estate lawyer, a woman whose mind was as sharp as a stiletto and whose loyalty to me was as solid and as unshakable as the Washington Monument. She answered on the first ring, her voice the familiar, warm, and deeply comforting sound of home. Ruth Bishop. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you've finally decided to let me take you to that new jazz club on U Street. Hello, Dee, I said, my voice a quiet, calm, and utterly emotionless thing. I'm afraid our social plans will have to be put on hold for a moment. I have a business matter to discuss. The shift in my tone, the complete absence of my usual warmth, immediately put her on high alert. Ruth, she said, her own voice losing its cheerful lilt, becoming a low, serious thing. What's wrong? Are you all right? I did not tell her the details of the phone call. I did not recount the words, the betrayal. The wound was too raw, too personal. And the emotional details were, at this point, irrelevant. All that mattered was the operational conclusion. I am perfectly all right, Dee, I said. In fact, for the first time in a very long time, I am perfectly clear. I am calling to inform you that a long-term high-risk asset in my portfolio has just officially defaulted. and I am ready to divest. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dee, who spoke my language, the language of quiet, academic metaphor, understood instantly. The high-risk asset was my son. I see, she said, her voice now a low, dangerous growl. So the day has finally come. It has, I confirmed. And I need your help. I need you to execute the capital plan. Everything. I want you to start on Monday morning. The capital plan was our code name, a grim private joke between two old friends. It was the contingency plan, the financial and legal doomsday device, that Dee had been urging me to put in place for years. A plan to protect myself from the very scenario that had just unfolded. It was a plan for my own total and complete liberation. Another pause, this one filled with a kind of grim, righteous satisfaction on her end. Everything, she confirmed, her voice now tight with a focused, professional energy. The house sale, the asset liquidation, the will? You're sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Dolores, I said, using her full name to convey the absolute, irrevocable finality of my decision. My son and his wife are on vacation for the next 10 days. I want it all done by the time they get back. I want them to come home to a new reality. Consider it done, Ruth, she said, and I could hear the fierce, protective loyalty in her voice, the sound of a true friend rising to the occasion. You just sit tight in that ridiculous McMansion of his and let me handle the logistics. The bursar of Howard University is about to remind her son what a real hostile takeover looks like. I ended the call. The first and most important order had been given. The wheels of my quiet, devastating revenge were now in motion. And I, sitting in my son's own stolen seat of power, was about to use his own resources to dismantle his future. The capital plan was not a single, simple action. It was a three-stage, coordinated, and legally ironclad strategy, designed by a master estate lawyer to be executed with the speed and efficiency of a military operation. Dee and I had developed it over a series of long, quiet conversations in her law office over the past few years, as my unease about Kevin and Jessica's character had grown from a vague worry into a full-blown, documented concern. The plan was designed for one specific contingency, a direct, hostile move by my son to seize control of my assets. The phone call I had just overheard was that hostile move. And the plan was now officially in effect. Stage 1. Asset liquidation. This was the foundational move, the one that would provide the resources for everything that followed. The primary asset, of course, was my house. The Capitol Hill row house was more than just my home. It was a multi-million-dollar piece of prime historic real estate, and it was completely paid for. The first part of the plan was to sell it. Not in a normal, slow on-market process, but in a swift, private off-market transaction. Dee, with her decades of connections in the DC legal and real estate worlds, had a short list of brokers who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. Quick, cash-only sales for diplomats, politicians, and other high-net-worth individuals who valued speed and discretion above all else. Using a power of attorney I had signed over to her years ago for this very purpose, Dee was authorized to accept a cash offer and to close the sale in a matter of days, not months. Stage 2. Life restructuring. This was the most radical and most liberating part of the plan. The proceeds from the house sale, combined with a significant portion of my own substantial retirement portfolio, were not to be reinvested in another property or in the stock market. They were to be used to fund a complete and total restructuring of my own life. For years, I had dreamed of a retirement filled with travel, with learning, with a freedom I had never allowed myself. The capital plan was designed to make that dream a reality, in the most dramatic and permanent way possible. The plan was to take the bulk of my liquid assets and make a single, massive, and deeply unconventional purchase. A lifetime residency in a private apartment on a luxury cruise ship. It was a concept I had read about, a floating, global community for the wealthy and adventurous. It was not a vacation. It was a new home, a permanent, mobile address that would take me around the world for the rest of my days. It was the ultimate act of untethering myself from the life and the family that had tried to imprison me. Stage 3. Legacy redefinition. This was the final, legal, and most personal part of the plan. It was the rewriting of my will. The new will, which Dee had also drafted years ago and held in her safe, was a simple, brutal, and elegant document. It would revoke all previous wills. It would make a series of generous bequests to a few trusted friends and distant relatives. and it would most importantly address the matter of my only son, Kevin Bishop. He would be mentioned by name, to prevent any future legal challenge on the grounds of accidental omission. And he would be left a single symbolic and deeply insulting dollar. The bulk of my remaining fortune, the assets not used for the lifetime cruise, would be bequeathed to a series of educational charities and to a new scholarship fund at Howard University, established in my name. The capital plan was a perfect three-pronged assault. It was designed to be swift, silent, and irreversible. By the time my son and his wife returned from their sun-drenched holiday, the three pillars of their future, their inheritance, their mother's home, and their mother's very presence in their lives, would have been, without their knowledge, completely and utterly demolished. On Monday morning, while I was in Potomac making a detailed inventory of my son's wine cellar, a task I undertook with a new grim sense of purpose, Dee was in her office in downtown D.C., setting the first and most critical stage of the capital plan in motion. Her first call was to a woman named Evelyn Reed, a name that was legendary in the world of high-end Washington real estate. Evelyn was not a typical broker. She was a closer. She worked with a small, exclusive clientele of diplomats, lobbyists, and international business people who needed to buy and sell valuable properties quickly, quietly, and for cash. She was a woman who understood the value of discretion and the power of a no-contingency offer. "Evelyn, it's Dee Jackson," my friend had said, her voice a smooth, professional calm. "I have a situation. A prime, historic property in Capitol Hill. My client needs to sell. Immediately. Off-market. Cash only. And she is prepared to be very motivated on the price." Evelyn, whose professional curiosity was immediately piqued, had asked for the details. Dee had provided them. The address of my beautiful four-story row house, its square footage, its historic details, and most importantly the fact that it was owned outright with no liens or mortgage, meaning a sale could be closed in a matter of days, not weeks. By noon, Evelyn had a short list of potential buyers. These were not families looking for their dream home. These were international investors, foreign governments looking for a discreet embassy property, and wealthy political consultants who needed a prestigious D.C. address. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Evelyn had arranged for a series of private back-to-back showings. Dee, using the keys I had given her, met the broker and the potential buyers at the house. The first offer came in before 5 o'clock. It was from a European diplomat, and it was a strong all-cash offer with a proposed closing date of just 3 days hence. Dee, a master negotiator, did not accept. "Thank you for the generous offer," she had told the broker. "My client is very motivated, but she is not desperate. We will be reviewing all offers tomorrow morning at 10. It was a classic legal tactic designed to create a sense of urgency, of competition. It worked perfectly. By 10 o'clock the next morning, they had 3 competing all-cash offers on the table. A quiet, frantic, and very high-stakes bidding war had erupted over my life's home. Dee and Evelyn conducted the negotiations via a series of swift, professional phone calls. By noon on Tuesday they had a final accepted offer. It was from a South American embassy, and it was for a price that was, while slightly below the absolute top market value, still a staggering, life-altering sum of money. And most importantly, it came with a single non-negotiable condition. The sale had to be closed with all funds transferred by the end of business on Friday. While I was in Potomac cataloging the expensive, joyless objects my son and his wife had accumulated, my own home, the repository of my entire life's history, was being sold out from under them. The contracts were drawn up. The title search was expedited. The legal machinery of a high-end real estate transaction moved with a speed and efficiency that would have been breathtaking to an outsider. On Friday afternoon, Dee sat in a quiet closing office with the embassy's legal representatives. She signed the final papers on my behalf, using her power of attorney. The funds, a wire transfer of a sum so large it was almost abstract, were deposited into a secure temporary holding account that Frank Moss had set up. It was done. In less than 5 business days, my house, my home of 45 years, the central asset in my children's greedy long-term plans, had been sold. It was no longer mine. And it was most certainly no longer theirs. The first and most significant piece of their future had just been, without their knowledge, completely and utterly liquidated. With the sale of the house complete and the proceeds safely secured, it was time for the second and most personally satisfying stage of the capital plan, the restructuring of my own life. I spent that weekend, my last weekend in my son's cold, empty mansion, not in a state of grief for the home I had just sold, but in a state of thrilling, exhilarating, and deeply focused research. I sat in Kevin's grand leather and mahogany home office, at his massive, imposing desk, and I used his high-speed fiber-optic internet connection to plan my escape. For years I had harbored a secret, quiet dream. A dream of a retirement filled not with quiet gardening and weekly bridge games, but with adventure, with travel, with the constant, stimulating discovery of new worlds. I had read, with a librarian's quiet fascination, about a new and exclusive concept in luxury travel: the residential cruise ship. It was not a vacation. It was a home. A permanent, floating, and endlessly mobile residence. A private apartment on a ship that circumnavigated the globe on a perpetual, ever-changing itinerary. It was a life of ultimate freedom, of radical untethering. And it was, I had always assumed, a fantasy, a beautiful but unattainable dream. But now, with the multi-million-dollar proceeds from the sale of my house sitting in a bank account, the dream was suddenly, shockingly, within my reach. I spent hours on the website of the most exclusive of these residential ships, a vessel called the World. I looked at the deck plans, at the itineraries, at the photographs of the beautifully appointed multi-room apartments. I read the testimonials from the residents, a global community of wealthy, interesting, and adventurous people who had chosen to make the entire world their home. This, I realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy, was my new life. This was my new home. It was the absolute perfect antithesis of the nursing home, the facility, that my son had been planning for me. He had wanted to put me in a small managed room in a single stationary building. I was about to put myself in a luxurious multi-room suite with a private terrace and an ever-changing oceanfront view. On Monday morning I made the call. I spoke to a sales director for the ship, a charming woman with a crisp British accent. I told her I was interested in purchasing a lifetime residency. I specified the suite I wanted, one of the largest, a 2-bedroom apartment on an upper deck with a panoramic view. She was of course delighted. She explained the process, the purchase price, the annual maintenance fees. The numbers were astronomical, the kind of figures that would have made my son's head spin. To me they were simply data points on a balance sheet. I instructed her to send the purchase agreement to my lawyer, D. Jackson, and to my financial advisor, Frank Moss. The deal was contingent, I explained, on an expedited closing. I wanted to be on board for the ship's next major voyage, which was departing from Lisbon, Portugal, in 3 weeks. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet, efficient, and very high-stakes financial and legal activity. Frank handled the wire transfers, moving the massive sums of money from the holding account to the ship's parent corporation. Dee handled the legal contracts, her sharp lawyer's eye ensuring that every clause, every detail was perfect. By the end of the week it was done. I was the official deeded owner of a private residence on the world's most exclusive cruise ship. My new life had been purchased. My escape was secured. I had taken the proceeds from the house my son had tried to steal, and I had used them to buy the entire world. With the house sold and my new floating life secured, there was only one piece of business remaining. It was the final and most personal stage of the capital plan, the formal, legal, and irrevocable redefinition of my legacy. On my last day of house sitting in the PTOAC Mansion, the day before Kevin and Jessica were due to return from their Caribbean holiday, I sat once again in my son's grand, empty office. But this time the meeting was not with a sales director. It was with my own past and my own future. Dee had arranged a secure 3-way video conference call between the 3 of us. Me in Potomac, Dee in her law office in downtown D.C., and a licensed mobile notary public who was sitting in a car just outside Dee's office. On the large high-definition screen of my son's computer, I could see my best friend's face, her expression one of grave, solemn satisfaction. "Are you ready, Ruth?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I'm ready, Dee," I replied. The new will, the one Dee had drafted years ago and had held in her safe for this very day, was a simple, brutal, and elegant document. It was the final legal expression of the new reality of my life. The notary began the formal proceedings, her voice a calm, professional drone as she confirmed our identities and the legality of the virtual signing. Dee then, for the official record, read the key clauses of the new will aloud. Article 1, she began. I, Ruth Eleanor Bishop, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils heretofore made by me. She turned the page. Article 2. I give, devise, and bequeath my personal effects, including all furniture, art, books, and jewelry, to my dear and loyal friend, Dolores Marie Jackson, to distribute or dispose of as she, in her sole discretion, sees fit. She paused, her eyes meeting mine through the screen. I gave her a small, grateful smile. Article 3, she continued, her voice now taking on a new, hard edge. I have one son, Kevin Michael Bishop. I have considered him in the making of this will. In recognition of his 20 years of absence from my life, and as a final testament to the independent path he has chosen, I hereby give, devise, and bequeath to my son, Kevin Michael Bishop, the sum of $1. The words, so cold, so final, so utterly dismissive, hung in the air of the quiet office. $1. Not just a disinheritance, but a final, legally documented insult. A bursar's final accounting of her son's worth. Article 4, Dee concluded, her voice now ringing with a quiet, triumphant finality. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, of every kind and description, and wherever located, I give, devise, and bequeath to the Howard University Library System, to be used for the establishment of the Ruth and David Bishop Scholarship Fund for aspiring librarians and archivists. It was done. My legacy would not be a house in Potomac. It would not be a trust fund for a man who did not love me. It would be a new generation of librarians, of keepers of stories, of guardians of the truth. It was a legacy that was true to the woman I had always been. The notary then guided me through the process of the digital signature. I signed my name on the electronic pad. Dee signed as the witness. The notary affixed her digital seal. The new will was executed. It was legal. It was binding. It was irreversible. I closed the laptop. I stood up from my son's desk for the last time. My work here was finished. I had sold my house. I had purchased my freedom. And I had, with a single quiet and deeply satisfying legal maneuver, completely and utterly disinherited my only child. The capital plan was complete. All that remained was for the enemy to return home and to survey the ruins of their own victory. Kevin and Jessica returned from their 2-week holiday in St. Bart's tanned, relaxed, and ready to execute the final phase of their own monstrous plan. They were, I am sure, filled with a sense of triumphant, righteous purpose. They had enjoyed their last, lavish vacation funded by debt. They were about to liquidate their mother's primary asset, a move that would solve all their financial problems and elevate them to a new, unassailable level of wealth and status. And they were going to do it under the guise of a loving, responsible concern for their aging, burdensome mother. They would have driven from the airport not to their own home in Potomac, but directly to my row house in Capitol Hill. The plan would have been simple: to confront me, to present me with the brochures for the beautiful nursing home they had chosen, and to begin the process of breaking down my resistance. They would have been prepared for tears, for arguments, for a long, emotionally draining battle. They were not prepared for the sign. I can picture the scene with a perfect cinematic clarity. Their luxury SUV, a car I knew they were 2 months behind on the payments for, would have turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street. They would have been chatting, laughing, rehearsing their lines. And then they would have seen it. Planted squarely in the center of my small, neat front lawn, the lawn I had tended with my own 2 hands for 45 years, was a large, professional, and deeply, shockingly, unapologetically read sign. It had a single brutal word on it in bold, white letters: sold. They would have slowed the car, their laughter dying in their throats. They would have stared at the sign, their brains struggling to process the impossible, incomprehensible data. Sold? It couldn't be. It was a mistake. A prank. Kevin would have stopped the car directly in front of the house. They would have gotten out. They would have walked up to the sign as if to confirm that it was real. They would have looked at the house, their inheritance, their future. And they would have seen that it was different. The windows were dark. The familiar, welcoming light in the front parlor was gone. A small, discreet lockbox, the kind used by real estate agents, was affixed to the front doorknob. The reality, in all its shocking, catastrophic finality, would have begun to sink in. They had not just been outmaneuvered. They had been completely and utterly preempted. The prize they had been planning to seize had already been removed from the board. The panic would have set in then, a frantic, desperate scramble for information. They would have called the real estate agent listed on the sign, only to be told in a polite but firm voice that the property had been sold in a private transaction and that she was not at liberty to discuss the details. They would have called me. And this is where the second and more personal part of their nightmare would have begun. Standing on the curb in front of the house they thought they were about to steal, a rising tide of panic and confusion overwhelming them, Kevin would have pulled out his cell phone and frantically dialed my number. The number I had had for 20 years. The number he had so rarely called. He would have expected to hear my familiar maternal voice. He would have been prepared to yell, to demand, to accuse. He was not prepared for the cold, robotic voice of the telephone company operator. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. There is no new number. Disconnected. The word would have been another blow, another piece of a puzzle that was becoming more and more terrifying. She hadn't just sold the house. She had vanished. He would have tried my old landline next, the number to the house itself. It would have rung, only to be answered by a man with a crisp, unfamiliar European accent, the new owner, the diplomat who had bought my life's home for cash. Their panic would have now escalated to a full-blown 5-alarm fire. They were not just losing a house, they were losing control. The quiet, predictable and burdensome old woman they had so confidently planned to manage had gone completely, and terrifyingly, off script. In a last-ditch, desperate effort they would have tried my cell phone again, hoping it was a temporary network issue. And this time it would have gone through. Not to me but to my new and final voicemail message. A message I had recorded with the help of a very amused Dee from the quiet, comfortable lounge of my new floating home. They would have listened, standing there on the sidewalk in Capitol Hill, the sold sign a mocking testament to their own profound and catastrophic failure, as my voice, a voice that was calm, clear, and filled with a joy they had never heard before, delivered the final, devastating, and deeply satisfying checkmate. "Hello," my recorded voice would have said, the sound of a gentle ocean breeze and the faint cry of a seagull in the background. "This is Ruth. If you're looking for me, I'm currently somewhere in the Mediterranean. I've sold the house, booked a lifetime cruise, and updated my will. I decided to stop being a burden and start being a legend. Please don't leave a message as I will be far too busy to return your call." And then the beep. They would be left standing on the curb in the ruins of their own greed, with nothing but the echo of my voice in their ears. They had lost the house. They had lost the inheritance. And they had, in a single brilliant and devastatingly quiet move, lost their mother. They were the ones who were now truly and completely on their own.